Hello, hi everyone. Thank you for joining in for this another conversation that we have today as a part of the Policy Panchayat, where we get people doing very interesting work in the policy space all across the field, right? And try to understand their journeys and what are some key insights that we can get from the careers that they have built, and how we can go about building a thriving career, learning from the same. So today we have a very interesting guest, Vanishree. She's the founder and she runs an organization called City Collab. Uh, Urban governance, urban planning, it's not something that we talk about too often, do we? Despite the fact that more than half of India lives in urban areas. I mean, I'm not going strictly by the census 2011 data. It's, let's just say, worse than outdated. And a lot of urban areas in India continue to be defined as rural just because of the kind of benefits they are in terms of Manrega and all. It's a different conversation altogether, which we can get into. Uh, but without any further ado, we'll quickly get started. My name is Yash. I run and lead PPI, and I work at Twitter in a policy role. And thank you so much for joining in. Thank you so much, Vani, for taking out the time today. Why don't we start with an introduction of you, and also why don't you tell us more about yourself and your career journey thus far?
Sure. Again, thanks, Yash, for inviting me. I think this is very exciting. So I'll just start. I did a course in architecture. This is about 15 years back. I have a degree in architecture, and in my till my fifth year, I realized that what really excites me is the built environment, and more important than the built environment is the people. The people aspects of built environment. How do we stay together in cities? What makes cities so fun, but at the same time so unequitable, etc. So then that led me to explore postgraduate education in urban planning. So I went to the US. I studied urban planning at Georgia Tech, worked with an urban design and planning firm there for quite a few years.
Right.
And foundation of how do we really make planning accessible to the people who it really impacts, right? Our decision as urban planners impacts everyone, literally everyone, living in cities. So that so my first 5 years there really laid a foundation for that. I was leading a lot of community engagement.
Right.
So essentially my role was how do we make plans simpler, how do we take them to the people that we are planning for,
Right.
how do we get their insights and inputs, but also keeping in mind that we are technical professionals, so a lot of that engagement is also education in the process, right? A lot of times it's very personal about my home and what do I see from my window, etc. So then so I did a lot of community engagement, open design planning. When we decided to move back to India, that spatial planning space was not this is 2010, very fully developed, right? So a lot of opportunities were in planning advocacy kind of space, where we were just Indian cities were just opening up to talks and discussions around how do we grow sustainably, right? How do we get public transport in our cities? How do we get better mechanisms for green spaces? How do we get affordable housing? So there were a lot of discussions. So I was fortunate to join this
Right.
international non-profit called ITDP. They work on sustainable development.
Yeah.
I worked with them for a few years. Again, it was limited to a sector. So because I wanted to explore more a broader area in cities, moved to another organization which um, gave me an opportunity to really work with officers, like government officers, present to government officers. And then finally I connected the dots, about 4 or 5 years back, that a lot of what I was doing was communicating, right? Or I was just helping organizations connect better to their stakeholders. So whether I was making that presentation to the IAS officer on why he should embrace a walkability policy for his city,
Yeah.
or I was converting like data into maps, which are more accessible. Everything was about communication, and I realized there's a gap in this space. Planning is so disconnected from people. We talk within our circles, etc., and that really kind of pushed me to pursue my interest, and my interest is in communication and storytelling.
Yeah.
So it pushed me to see if I can combine my education in planning and my interest in skills in communication storytelling to really help organizations, citizens groups, anyone communicate more effectively with each other, right? And make complex planning is so complex, right? It's a lot of times the way we write our documents, the way government speaks, it's very complex. So how do we make it simpler? How do we help government communicate with each other, donors communicates with organizations working on ground, etc. And that's the origin of City Collab. I worked independently for a few years, but I realized that it's really a gap, and a lot needs to be done. So I started a company called City Collab. Now I have a small team. Essentially, what we do is anyone in the urban sector, anyone interested in improving cities, could be local governments, could be a non-profit working for, in slum improvement, could be a think tank, could be a donor interested in giving. We really help them frame their ideas, reach out to their audiences better, engage with their stakeholders better. So our work also ranges from everything from like technical research based, policy research based documents to how do we leverage social media to really connect with the masses. So it's been a exciting journey, and I look forward to kind of more people embracing this idea that we really have to make planning more accessible.
This is thank you uh, for the context, Vani. Really, very helpful. And this just happened today evening while I was just coming back from work, and I was reminded of. So I live in central Delhi, and this is one part of the city which is let's just say very well designed, and I mean there are wide boulevards and there's just a lot of greenery and what have you, right? And I realize the sheer privilege in the sense it's you can actually feel it that this part of the city is actually a bit cooler, if I can put it that way, than most other parts given just the built environment here. There's just so much of walkability around, right? You can go cycling, you can walk around. It's just so much cleaner, safer. Of course, that's not feasible for all parts of India and all parts of every city in India. That's not the point. But the point is that a bit of planning and it is the difference it makes to quality of life. It's just phenomenal. But just building on that, right? Just staying on the theme. What are your views on urban planning, urban design, sustainability in India, right? Especially someone like you who's worked in this space for so long. What's your take on where we stand, and maybe if I could ask, say, the top 3 areas where we could urgently improve in?
I think that's a great question, because that also reflects how we as people think about planning and how planning contributes to our lives, right? Like you said, central Delhi area, you walk around, there are trees, there are greenery. So I think, I think urban planning is still nascent. It still has to, achieve, it still has to mature as a discipline, and for a couple of reasons. One, I think a lot of our understanding of planning comes from this very top-down idea of planning. That means like Connaught Place was planned, or like Central Delhi was planned, or like Chandigarh was planned, which was essentially barren. Government buys, you lay out the street grid, you make excellent infrastructure. That's our idea of planning. Unfortunately, the way our cities are growing, we have to really kind of leave that aside. It is about intervening in this very messy, idea of cities. India, we are a market economy. We have private property rights in India, right? Now, to imagine that idea of planning, that you go and kind of just intervene in a faraway site, just does not work for our cities anymore. So I think the first thing, I think planning is gradually changing to a more liberal planning, where we understand the economy of cities, where we understand that there are multiple people holding land. Anything that you try to do and intervene for public good, whether it's adding a park or adding a grid of streets, means that you have to negotiate with that private property owner, right? It's his private land, private right. And how do we do that, right? Because and still we don't do that very well. I would say we still don't have mechanisms. Some areas do, like Gujarat, Ahmedabad, we have better mechanisms of land pooling, etc. So one is that how do we move away from this idea of a designer goes or a planning goes, lays out plan, there's nothing right now, and then a city will emerge. No, I think We'll have to now look at, how can Mumbai, for example, hold 10 times more people than it currently holds, in a way that doesn't cause friction, and I would say which improves and enhances quality of life for everyone, right? And make Mumbai a better city. So the second is, just buying onto that people, as citizens, I think we are very afraid of any change. No, it's like, and our cities constantly change. So how do we, I don't want my neighbor's house to get developed into a 5-storied apartment, because pehle to now we are all used to living in, single family tenements. Now suddenly my city is growing and I see, tall buildings coming up, and I resist it, right? Because I don't understand better. I think it's going to hamper my quality of life. Everything's going to go, sun is going to go. As planners, I think we really have to go out there and communicate what planning is all about to people. The second thing I would say is we have to get better at connecting with citizens. We have to get better at saying, what do we do? We have to get them saying, we recognize your property rights, but we also need housing for everyone else who's going to come in the city. We also need public schools. We need, healthcare. So how do we make it happen, right? It's about the idea of city. So that is second, that we have to connect better. And I think third is, I think we need more autonomy to cities. I think it's just, I think closer the government is to people, the better it will be probably to respond. So a lot of times currently state governments prepares plans. So government of a state will prepare plans for all the towns in that state. They don't know the realities, they don't know land prices, they don't know the market dynamics, they don't know just so many things. So I think planning has to, come closer. Governance has to come closer to cities. City governments have to be more empowered, to take these challenges. It'll be a struggle. Okay, a lot of times state governments think city governments are not ready. That's the reason. So but I think we'll figure out as we go. I think that's one thing in India that we really need to bring governance closer to people and make city governments more empowered.
Totally. In fact, I think this reminds me of the whole debate around, this was the 73rd Amendment of the Constitution, right? Wherein the discussion was, how can we devolve funds, functions, and functionaries to local governments, right? And couldn't agree more on that, Vani. Ahmedabad is probably the only city in India which is, for its outward growth, right? It has done it in a very planned manner. I think New York Times had a phenomenal map-based visualization on how Ahmedabad is an exception to all other cities in India and how we are going about it. But even if I keep that aside for a minute, if you can tell our audiences, Vani, in a very, in a manner which humanizes the subject, that why does city planning matter? Like, if you can delve into some practical examples, right? Why should we care about it?
So I think one, it matters because cities matter, and cities are places of density. We have a lot of, like, from in rural landscapes, we have like very sparse density. We have land, we have resources. Cities work because we have a lot of people in a smaller area, and that's the beauty about cities, right? Because there are hundreds of research firms, IT firms, hundreds of private hospitals to choose from, hundreds of private schools for your kids to choose from. Now a lot of times we think that our cities are growing, already Mumbai itna bada ho gaya, Ahmedabad itna bada ho gaya, abhi hame aur growth nahi chahiye. A lot of us think like that. And we say कि rural development करो, right? अगर rural में हम रास्ते बनाएंगे, or if we construct infrastructure, then I don't think, we have to understand, you'll make one school, you'll make one public health center, right? You'll make one industry. But what about those millions of people, girls, boys, growing up to become scientists or musicians or anything else? Cities matter, so urban planning matters. So we have to really think. And why does urban planning matter? Because if we have so much density and so many people with different outlooks and different needs, a person coming from a rural area just needs a shelter, clean water, sanitation, toilet, right? He or she is coming to a city to make some money, earn some money. people like you and me, we want recreational spaces in our city. We complain, right? We go out of India. Why can't our cities have nice streets?
Yeah.
Someone else wants. So urban planning is the mechanism in which we can, through which we can help people understand these trade-offs. And there will be trade-offs, right? We can't have cities. That's why each city looks different than the other.
Yeah.
And who makes these decisions? A lot of it is driven by who's in power. What is the goal of that city? What do citizens want? So what citizens want in Kochi versus what citizens want in Delhi or Mumbai, some of it plays. But I think as urban planners, our role is to make these trade-offs clear, plan in a way so that people can live without friction, people
Yeah.
can have a good quality of life, clean air to breathe. And that's why we plan our cities. If we leave our cities to grow on their own, it'll be very difficult. We will not be able to get that public space that we need for streets. We'll not get that public space for parks. We will not get public space for affordable housing. Plus, we'll not get an efficient street grid. So all of that, it makes our everyday life simpler, right? So we
Yeah.
need urban planning, and we need to be concerned about urban planning as citizens.
How much of this money, I'm just picking the threads from what you just said, because personally, I believe this is a huge obstacle, whatever we're describing for us to achieve from that. How much of this flows from the fact that the the people with the actual power over our cities are not elected officials, but bureaucrats. Like, so is I think the municipal commissioner who has the actual power, right? In municipalities in India, municipal corporations, not the mayor. It's just a title ahead, if I'm in that sense. I mean, tell us more about that, please.
I can tell you my views
Yeah.
about it. So I think, as planners, I think we are used to seeing ourselves as technical people, as
Yeah.
technocrats, right? And one thing that we don't like is political interference. So a lot of times you will hear planners say that, plan to humne bana diya, but the politician. I think otherwise. I think finally the elected officials are the people who are elected.
Yeah.
They have to safeguard the interest of their
Citizens.
community, and
Yeah.
anything that happens in the community. So planning is political. So we have to find ways to embrace. It is difficult. It's a challenge. We also have to mature as a democracy. Because sometimes the local elected officers don't speak the same language as us, for example, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So there are challenges. We also feel that the elected, sometimes the councillors are thwarting something for multiple reasons. So there are valid reasons for why we feel, but I think it's not going to get us anywhere if we think that, eliminate, or just keep planning, or politicians separate to planning. Planning is a field that we will need to embrace. Politics of the city, we will need to work with the elected officials. We'll need to find language to speak with the elected officials, work with them to
Yeah.
figure out, otherwise they will know, if we don't engage them, they will find ways to get into your plans, right? I mean, or change your plan, modify, and then we can't really, modify. So I think
Yeah.
it's critical that we embrace that it's going to be a part of what we are dealing with. We have to work with elected representatives and not see it as a very top down technocratic technical process. I think more of it is people. Cities are people than anything else. So
Absolutely. Shifting the focus a little to careers, right, in this space, and honestly, the space is a profession in general, as a vocation in general. For anyone who's looking to say, uh, build a career in this larger urban planning, design, city governance space, right? Why don't you give us a picture, Vani, of what does that look like? Like maybe what the verticals are, what the skills required are.
sure, I think urban policy is so vast, and we need, cities are complex, so we need interdisciplinary professionals, to work together
Yeah.
to guide where cities are going. So 2-3 ways. So one is the technical, path of being an urban planner, which is a
Okay.
technical, you are a technical profession. You are skilled at reading cities, mapping cities, decoding them, planning, etc. So that is, that's a urban planning path, which means after your degree, I think it requires an architecture, civil engineering, geography, economics, some of those fields. You
Right.
can go a degree in urban planning that will help you get you the skills of actual spatial planning, right?
Okay.
But I think that's one way, but we also need a lot more economists getting interested in urban economics, right? And finally, cities are really about markets and how markets work.
Yeah.
Why does a city grow in a certain direction, or why does a McDonald's choose to locate here and not somewhere else?
Yeah.
These are market decisions. We can't plan them as planners. We try to a lot of times and fail. So I think we need a lot more understanding of urban economics, urban economists and planners to work together. And all planning implications have huge decisions. So we have done lot of issues, so we have failed because we have not considered cities as economic centers and something as like a flat thing, like we design a house ki ye site hai uske upar plan kar do. Cities don't work like that. So we need a lot more urban economists. We need lawyers probably who are very well kind of interested in land laws, interested in how do we really look at urban land regulations. So there are multiple ways, and then the path I have chosen is that of communication, that anyone in this field will require skills of decoding complex concepts for everyone, right? So whether it's a local government presenting to state government, they will need to present effectively. Whether it's the local government presenting to people, they will need to present effectively. If I am a planner, I want that cycle path approved, I need to take it to that local counselor and be able to, talk it to him in his language.
Yeah.
It's full of jargon, sometimes our plan. So I think there is a lot of space. I think we are, we have to I'm very optimistic about it. Our cities are growing. We are moving towards a more urban future. So in terms of urban policy and planning space, there are multiple ways that people can get into engage with these issues. There are environmentalists. How do we get into the urban space, because that's we do need growth, we do need cities, but now we also have a threat of climate change. So what does it mean? Technology for cities. There are startups coming up with solutions from everything, data management for traffic to cleaning gutters using robotics. So
Yeah.
it's an exciting space. Our cities need a lot of us working together to change it, improve it. So yeah, I think it's all those. There's a wide spectrum where people can make careers in the urban.
That's very interesting, and especially the whole urban economics bit. Like, generally had no insights on that, Vani. If you can build on that thought, right? About skills in particular, and also the kind of places which hire for for someone who wants to work in urban policy. What does that look like? Like, if I'm undergrad, right, and I've decided I want to build a career in this space, then probably the two biggest questions on my mind will be that, okay, what should I upskill myself in, right? So some of that is of course technical that you mentioned, but even otherwise, what the skills look like in general, and also which places will hire me. If
Okay, sure. So I think so if you're an undergrad and who's interested in urban policy, you take up. I think there are a lot of kind of think tanks, think and do tanks, which are researching on a lot of how our cities work, what our
Right.
cities need. IDFC Institute, for example,
Yeah.
on top of my head, is one of them. There are
Yeah.
large multinational world banks will hire urban economists.
Right.
One is that very large policy space where think tanks, multilateral institutions really trying to decode this, figure this out, do research and put it out all there, right? We need to think about our cities in a certain way. So I think if you are, if you're an economist or, an urban policy grad, that's one space. There are also international organizations which are hiring. Now, the second, the space is working with governments, right? So you can
Right.
work with governments in 2-3 different ways. So governments hire planners. We need good planners in the government. So you have these, most cities will have these planning authorities or planning and development authorities,
Right.
like DD
Yeah.
or Ahmedabad Development Authority. Unfortunately, for a longest time, most of them hired civil engineers.
Right.
or it was planning was not. So now a planner is a more multifaceted professional. He or she brings an understanding of many more areas of economics. So you work with the government.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot. I also teach, so I'm seeing students getting interested in government. There are also governments recognizing that we need trained professionals joining us. So I think the other way to work with government is in urban management. So now you see urban planning is a long term idea of planning cities and thinking about the future. And urban
Yeah.
management means how do we make our everyday life easier, right? How do we make sure
Yeah.
that bus reaches on time, that street, the waste is collected, and everyday aspects of urban functioning. So you also work in that. These days you also have a lot of fortunately, unfortunately, what has happened in this space is a lot of the big fours, or the management consultancies have gotten into
Yeah.
urban, right?
Yeah.
So the smart cities unit, most of the cities, one city it'll be either a PwC or
Yeah.
someone else. So they hire. So if you really want to, so you're not directly a government hire, but there are opportunities to work through these management consultancies in the urban management space, where you really
Right.
get to see how decisions are getting made, how costs matter, where is the revenue being generated, etc. So that's also an urban management space that people can get into. Yeah, but so I think there are multiple ways uh, to probably get involved in this
Yeah,
sector.
this is very super helpful. And just one last bit on this particular point itself. Is a master's degree indispensable? And if that's the case, if um, I don't want you to get into specific, but maybe if there are few countries or programs that you would recommend, right, that people generally take up to build a career here.
So masters in urban planning is important if you really want to work on planning, which
Right.
is one aspect of this whole urban story, which
Yeah.
is how do you make long-term plans for cities, right?
Yeah.
So for that, there are skills that you just have to learn. You have to learn how to work with data. You have to learn how to work with maps, geospatial information, etc. So for that, urban planning is a technical education. Is helpful if you want to really make plans, right? So for that you can get a master's in urban planning.
Okay.
India has good programs. CEPT University here in Ahmedabad has a master's in urban planning program.
Right.
I think STA in Delhi has an urban planning program. There are a few others. So you get that overall understanding of this, what is the city and how do you plan, and all the skills that you need in an urban planning degree. Outside, I chose to get my education outside for multiple reasons. I just wanted to experience, cities outside India, etc. But you
Yeah.
similarly also have masters in, they are called masters in city and regional planning, or masters in urban planning degrees
Right.
outside India.
Hmm.
I think most of those schools get grads from everywhere, right? So most of American universities, you don't have to be an architect or an engineer, or geographer, economist. In India, I think the programs are still limited to those fields. But for
Right.
example, I went to Georgia Tech. My classmates came, everything. One was a math graduate, one was came from landscape or liberal arts. But as long as you are interested, you can, so a lot of planning programs outside India do get a lot of, so that will be great, to do those. There are also good programs in urban policy,
Okay.
in India, outside India, urban, which give you like a good international development, urban policy. These are also, programs that can give you an orientation.
Right.
There are also programs in economics, where you can go and get into urban economics. So yeah, I think there are a lot of options. I don't think, like you said, it's not indispensable. I think we have to figure out how do we want to contribute
Right.
um, in that space, and what it means and what skills do I need to grow into that space.
If I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think the Indian Institute of Human Settlements in Bengaluru, they also have a fellowship. If you, I think even,
Yes.
yeah, Housing and Urban Affairs Ministry has a fellowship to that extent. So it's
Yes.
really dynamic, that space. Like, it's very interesting. Okay,
Yes.
final two questions. First is, we'll get the easy one out of the way. Smart city projects, right? Your take on it. anything, yeah, first thoughts that you have?
Sure. I think what these projects have the potential to do, I think, is get that first pilot on the ground. Okay, that's the funding. That's the funding for how I see it. That if you really want to demonstrate how our cities can be complete streets with great footpaths, cycle paths, you get enough funding to do that. You can apply. You can get. Pune has demonstrated as, for example, how to make a good street. Challenge. What happens after that, right? I mean, that funding stops. It takes 5 years, 8 years to implement that street. Then what? So I think the challenge is how do we build momentum and scale these projects? So smart cities is a good, I think, it's a good way to pump some funding into pilots and demonstrate that what it is. But finally, it all comes down to cities. Then we need thousands of kilometers of streets, right? We don't need 5 kilometers. That smart city is only going to give you 3 kilometers of street, or like, I don't know, hundreds of cameras in some area or whatever. So those are just small pilots. But nevertheless, I think what it has done is it has gotten this area of urban planning in people's radar.
Great.
I think more people recognize it because of the smart cities term, right? Like, a lot more citizens are engaged. So I think that's an achievement of the program, and I think scale is something we really need to think about.
Yeah, like sometimes I feel that, and I lived in Pune for 3 years for my college, and I couldn't agree more with you, Vani, that there's some change that has happened, but then a lot of it is just dressing on top of whatever we have already. Like, there's not much but definitely in terms of awareness, wow, it's worked very well. Like, people know what city planning is in that sense, at least. There's a sense of coverage, at least. Finally,
just to add on to that, if cities have to focus on becoming well-governed, well-planned. If you're a good governed city, you will also utilize smart city funds better, and you will deliver good service. If you don't have that foundation, you will do like, some upar ka something, right? So that's the thing. Fundamentally, cities have to just improve in governance and capacities, everything, right?
I think you would agree Indore is a great example of that. Like,
Indore is a great example of an issue. You will get many cities in which they have picked up a issue, and the bureaucracy and everyone has gone after that issue and solved it. But it's one issue, right? Planning is much complex than that. So that's what we have to track. So
fair enough. Absolutely. It's very helpful. Okay, final question. And I just wanted to indulge in this. I was reading an article recently, Vani, in which, it was essentially comparing Gurgaon and Chandigarh. When I say comparing, I mean just taking a different perspectives on the two cities. And it said that Gurgaon is probably one of our most abject failures in terms of city planning. Like, there's no planning to speak of, right? While Chandigarh is nice and clean streets and at intersections, and it's just greenery and what have you. But then the article talked about a perspective which I never thought of before, that Gurgaon is an actual engine of growth for this country. The kind of industries and service sector and the sheer number of jobs it's generated and all of that, its contribution to the exchequer, right? Gurgaon is an engine of growth. It's what India needs. Chandigarh is a heavily over-subsidized capital of two of India's richest states, which just lives off the lavish lifestyles of bureaucrats funded by taxpayers' money. It has created no innovation, very minimal industries, nothing to speak of. And I never thought of it this way before, but then I was like, there's nothing to disagree, at least in terms of my personal opinion, whatever little I know of it. Nothing against Chandigarh at all, but in terms of a city model, Chandigarh is not what India needs in that sense. Gurgaon is what we need far more of. So
correct.
I just wanted to hear your thoughts on this, that how do you look at something like this?
I think, it's a fantastic, again, it reflects on how we think about planning. We think, whenever we say planning, we think of Chandigarh, okay, in India. That's common because our idea still is that planning happens at one go. Chandigarh happened at one go, okay? There was nothing there. The government bought land. It got a French architect, Le Corbusier, to like plan the street grid and do it. If you look at Chandigarh, when people say that Chandigarh is a great example, if you look at Chandigarh now, beyond that street of grids that happened, look at how it's growing right now. It is growing as poorly as any other city, right? With no street grid. So I don't think that's the model. Now, Gurgaon on the other side is exactly what you said. Gurgaon emerged because there was a need for office spaces, commercial spaces, housing, everything, and market provided it.
Yeah.
That's with or without planner.
Yeah.
There was a need and the market fulfilled that need. That's the gap we have to fill. We have to recognize that our cities are going to be more like Gurgaon. The market forces are going to, we are not going to, no one's going to wait for a planner to plan, and then, so we have to be, we have to have a foresight. We have to believe that our cities are going to grow. They are going to grow further. They are going to become, like you said, more, they are going to be driving the future of our country. They are going to be driving the GDP of our country. Embrace that, plan for it, right? So one way, a lot of scholars say that Indian cities and South Asian cities have to adopt a twofold approach, right? One, you have to make room to grow outside. Our cities are still very compact. Like you gave an example of Ahmedabad. You have to just believe that Ahmedabad is going to grow 3-4 times. So what do I need to do today to allow that to not become Gurgaon or not become, so what do you need to do? A grid of streets, everything. So you make that plan. And the second, we have to densify, right? So that means our cities, jahan pe, because, wherever, the closer we are to jobs, city center, that's where people want to be. So we have to find systems of upgrading our infrastructure so that our cities can grow both vertically and horizontally, right? So that's there is Gurgaon. Otherwise, most of our cities are going to become like Gurgaon. Which is, we have the economy, we have the talent, we have the people, but we'll not have the systems to reduce the friction or account for equity and environmental concerns. Then it'll be just, and so we just accept market forces and work within that framework.
That's all I had to ask today, Vani. Just one final thought, that while I was reading up more, in the run-up to our conversation today, I realized that there are a lot more top-down planned cities in here than I knew of. For example, Bhubaneswar was essentially a planned city. Naya Raipur, which is Chhattisgarh's technical new capital, I'm assuming. There's Newtown right next to Calcutta, and that's also a planned city that's coming up. There's a lot more of these that are coming up, and I just hope these work out to the best of the intent. But thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. And for everyone, please do subscribe and leave your comments down below of who can we get next, and what subject should we cover the next time around. But thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Yash. This was a good, fun conversation. I hope some of the audience will get excited about urban.
And please do look Vani up. We'll link her profile in the show notes. So please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Good night.
Good night.